Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chafei, volume 25, the first Sicha for Parshas Lecha. This Sicha is an explanation in the very first commandment that Avraham Avinu is formally given in the Torah, which is in the beginning of our Parsha. And with this begins also the story of Am Yisrael, of our nation. And also the Hayrah for us, the directive, the lesson that we take away from this. As a quick introduction, we know that the formal, official biography, the life story of Avraham Avinu begins in this week's Parsha, in Parshas Lecha. And as the Torah tells us that he's already 75 years old at this point. Now we know that Avraham Avinu recognized Hashem on his own when he was 3 years old. Later it developed further when he was 40 years old. And he didn't keep it to himself, but rather he announced it and he went to teach the entire civilization, whoever he could reach, about the oneness of Hashem. And in fact, he was thrown into the furnace in Ur Kasdim, and many things happened in his life up to this point. Another thing to be familiar with, the idea of a mitzvah. We know a mitzvah means a commandment. However, the Torah chooses the word mitzvah to describe the commandment, although there are other words in the biblical Hebrew that can mean command. Why? Because as Chassidus explains, the word mitzvah also comes from the etymology of tzafsa v'chibur, a connection, a bond. When we do a mitzvah, we're not just fulfilling Hashem's will, but with this we're connecting to Hashem. And finally, to have an appreciation of the way Chassidus explains the first commandment that Avraham Avinu received, which is Lech Lecha me'artzecha u'me'meladecha u'me'beis avicha, go away from your land, from your artzecha, me'meladecha, from your birthplace, u'me'beis avicha, from the house of your father. So Chassidus explains that artzecha can also come from the word ratzain, which means your desires, from your own wills, your own desires. Me'meladecha, birthplace, something that's inborn, that is your habits that you develop through life. And Beis Avicha, we know that in Chassidus, in Kabbalah, the concept of Av, a father, refers to Chachma, intellect. And what Hashem is saying, go away from all of these things, the things that you conditioned yourself and you've come to conclusion on your own, El Haaretz Asher Areka, to the land that I will show you, to the desires, to the will, to the way of thinking that I will direct you to. Okay, let's get into the Sicha. So in the beginning of our Parsha, the Ramban, that's Nachmanides, asks the following questions. It seems that Hashem says to Avraham Avinu that as a result, meaning as a reward for him leaving his land, because of this, I'm going to make you into a great nation. So the Ramban asks, what, why, how? In other words, what's the connection? Typically, says the Ramban, you find that Hashem says, fulfill all my commandments, go in my ways, and then I will do such and such for you. But here, Hashem says just leave, and for that, just for leaving, for going away, I'm going to give you this great reward that you're going to become a great nation and so on. And the Ramban asks, what's the connection? The Ramban answers that because the people in Ur Kasdim were making it very difficult for him, and they kept on bothering him and kept on causing him much grief and pain, distracting him from his service of Hashem. Therefore, Hashem tells him, when you leave, it's not a reward. It's almost like a result. It's cause and effect. When you leave, then you're going to be able to grow. You're going to be able to become a great nation. So the Rebbe asks, this still does not answer why the story of Avraham Avinu's life, the formal, official biography of Avraham Avinu, who was the father of Am Yisrael, begins with this commandment, with Lech Lecha. Why didn't he begin like it begins with at least the way it describes Noach? Before going into the life of Noach, it tells us he was a tzaddik, he was a great person, he's already accomplished so many things, and now this is what's going to happen. Moreover, we find that in Torah Shebiksav, meaning in the entire Torah, almost nowhere is there any mention, any description, certainly not explicit description, nor detailed description, of Avraham Avinu's life up to this point. And he's already 75 years old. So the bottom line is, why does the narrative of Avraham Avinu begin with Lech Lecha? Says the Rebbe, the answer is because the beginning of our faith, of our people, of Am Yisrael, begins with Avraham Avinu. He was the first Yid. Avraham Avinu himself, there is a categorical difference between the first 75 years of his life and now beginning with this first commandment that he receives directly from Hashem. You see, there's a fundamental distinction between the connection that a person develops, a human being, with Hashem, versus, meaning a person in general, versus the connection that Avraham Avinu, or a Yid, has with Hashem. You see, a regular person, a guy, how do they develop their connection with Hashem? Through knowledge, through understanding, and then recognition and appreciation of Hashem. By a Yid, it's different. It doesn't come from the intellect and the understanding, but rather by a Yid, by an Avraham Avinu, the main connection to Hashem is the fact that Hashem chooses us and separates us from everything else, distinguishes us from all other nations in order to be connected to Him. Now, since our connection to Hashem stems from the power of the Creator, meaning from Hashem's power, so it comes out from this that it's not that we are on a higher level versus all the other people that are connected to Hashem, that we are greater, but in the same category. But rather, our connection to Hashem is totally and absolutely on a different category, in a totally different kind of the connection of any other human being to Hashem. Meaning that it's an absolutely different level. And therefore, when the narrative of Am Yisrael begins, which is describing our connection to Hashem through the fulfillment of His mitzvahs, and as we said in the introduction, a mitzvah means tzafso v'chibur, a connection, a bond with Hashem. Therefore, it begins with the point of Avraham Avinu's life, not where he connected to Hashem through his understanding and an appreciation of godliness, as we described when he was 3 years old, and later when he was 40 years old, and so on and so forth. But rather, it begins with the connection of Hashem, where Hashem chooses him, and Hashem commands him to become connected to Him through doing whatever it is, in this case, for leaving his land. So this is the contrast of the connection with Hashem coming from koyach atzmoi, from one's own abilities, one's own powers, versus as it comes by connecting to the koyach of Hashem, to the power of Hashem. And that, where do we see that? Vayomer Hashem al Avram. Hashem says to him and gives him the commandment. That means the connection is coming from Hashem. All humans, even after they connect with Hashem and they follow Hashem's commandments, yet they still remain, they don't become a new entity. They don't transform. It's rather that they just become better versions of a human being, better versions of themselves. They are still the same, but they're connected to Hashem. However, when a Yid connects to Hashem, it actually turns him into a Metzius Chadasha, almost like a new existence. And here's why we see the contrast, the difference between the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, the 7 universal laws of mankind, versus the mitzvahs that a Yid has. The Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, fundamentally, is the idea of them is that it brings stability to civilization, that the world should be l'sheves yitzara, yishuv ha'olam, it should be an inhabited world. That means there's a purpose, there's a reason for it. However, the mitzvahs that we do, that Yidden are commanded to do, is not just for yishuv ha'olam, but rather it's for tzafso v'chibur, to connect us to Hashem. It's not to elevate the world, but rather to connect us to Hashem. And therefore, it's not dependent on our abilities. Even the greatest person cannot really connect to Hashem. Where would you have a power to connect to Hashem? Rather, where does it come from? The only thing that plays a role here is the actual connection which is coming from the commandment of Hashem. And this is what the Torah emphasizes here, right in the beginning of the story of Avraham Avinu as the first Yid. That he says, your connection comes exclusively from Vayomer Hashem al Avrohom, that Hashem is speaking to you, that Hashem is giving you this ability, Hashem is giving you this power. Now, Torah, milashon hira. We know that everything in the Torah, every detail, every story, every narrative is a directive. This means that the Torah is not only teaching us, generally speaking, as we said, what a Yid is all about, but rather this Torah is telling us how to approach and what our attitude should be, how we should conduct ourselves and have the correct attitude when it comes to the observance of each and every mitzvah. What is the directive? What is the lesson? A person can think, wait, the real proper way to approach service of Hashem And the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs is first to learn, to understand what Yiddishkeit is, what every mitzvah is all about, and then to fulfill the mitzvah. Especially when you encounter a Jew that has no knowledge, no idea of Yiddishkeit, knows nothing of Yiddishkeit. They just know merely the fact that they are Jewish. One would think, listen, first you got to give him a little crash course, give him some understanding, give him some appreciation of our heritage, of what Torah is all about, and only then try to get him to do some mitzvahs. Comes the directive and says, no, you have to do it. And in fact, even if one can argue, wait, Nasa v'nishma, why would you even think that you should first learn and then do? We said Nasa v'nishma. But a person will feel like, okay, we said Nasa v'nishma, but it's still not right. It's still not fulfilling. It's still not, so to speak, accomplishing anything if I don't first understand. And this is where the directive over here comes. That Hashem says, absolutely, exclusively, our connection with Hashem as Jews is because of Ayomer Hashem al Avrohom. Hashem is the one who creates this connection, this bond, and therefore the fundamental of service of Hashem, the foundation, the Yesod, is Emunah, faith, and Kabbalah's oil, accepting Hashem's directives without any sophistication whatsoever. Of course, says the Rebbe, this is true even after one does learn. Nasa v'nishma means that after you do Nasa, you have to do Nishma, you have to understand, you have to learn. One has to constantly grow in their understanding and appreciation of Yiddishkeit. Even after one learns Nigla and Chassidus, and he has now full Ava, full Yira, yet when it comes to fulfillment of any mitzvah, whatever the mitzvah may be, it has to be with the approach that it's not because of my understanding, it's not because of my appreciation of the mitzvah, but rather because Asher Kidishanu b'mitzvoisav, that Hashem sanctified us with His mitzvahs, vitzivanu, and He commanded us, that it's all coming from Hashem. And now we can appreciate and answer the question of the Ramban, why the first mitzvah was to leave his land, and how that is what's going to make him into a great nation. You see, Chassidus explains, as we mentioned in the introduction, that the deeper meaning of Lech Lecha, to go away from Me'artzecha, from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house, really in a deeper level means Me'artzecha means from your own desires, from your own wants. Me'ladecha means from your own habits, things that develop over time, that you get conditioned by your environment or by your studies or by your training. Mibeis Avicha means from your own intellectual abilities. You have to leave all of that and go to my Eretz, Hashem says, to where I show you, to my desires. And now we can appreciate it. Because Hashem is telling him, you're no longer going to be connected to me like you did up to this point. From Koyach Atzmai, from your own, even though Avraham Avinu's Koyches was pretty great Koyches, right? He accomplished a lot. From your own Artzecha, from your own Ladadcha, from your own Beis Avicha, but rather you're going to do it because, and you're going to do it El Ha'aretz Asher Ar'eka, that I will show you. You will follow what I'm, and then you're going to become Va'escha Lagoy Gadol. Then you're going to become a great nation, the nation of Am Yisrael. And now we can also appreciate the reward, quote unquote, right? The question of the Ramban, why this specific role of becoming a great nation? That Hashem says, as a result of this, I will make you a great nation. Because true greatness, the ultimate greatness, comes from Hashem. Because the truth is that any creature, any human being, does not have real, authentic greatness. As great as one is, it's limited. True greatness comes from Hashem. So therefore, when we connect to Hashem, that's where we assume true greatness. And then further, Hashem says, Va'avarechecha, and I will bless you. Which means, what did Hashem say, as Rashi says? First, the blessings were only exclusively in my hands, says Hashem. But now, by you becoming connected to me, now you have the power to bless. V'agad l'shmecha, I'll make your name great. Again, because true greatness of a name comes from Hashem. And therefore, by connecting to Hashem, by this tzafsa v'chibur, by this bond, by this connection to Hashem, that comes from the power of Hashem, because by Yomer Hashem al Avraham, then we assume all these qualities, and now everything makes sense.